What is the significance of instinct in business? Does a reliable gut feeling separate winners from losers? And is it the most valuable emotional tool any entrepreneur can possess? My observations of successful company owners lead me to believe that a highly analytical attitude can be a drawback. At critical junctures in commercial life, risk-taking is more an act of faith than a carefully balanced choice. Frequently, such moments require decisiveness and absolute conviction above all else. There is simply no time to wait for all the facts, or room for doubt. A computer program cannot tell you how to invent and launch a new product. That journey involves too many unknowns, too much luck, and too much sheer intuition, rather than the infallible logic that machines deliver so well. As Chekhov said, an artist's flair is sometimes worth a scientist's brains. Entrepreneurs need right brain thinking. When I have been considering whether to buy a company and what price to offer, I have been blinded too often by reams of due diligence from the accountants and lawyers. Usually it pays to stand back from such mountains of gray data and weigh up the really important issues, and decide how you feel about the opportunity. Over the last 10,000 years there seem to have been two separate and conflicting building sentiments throughout the history of towns and cities. One is the desire to start again, for a variety of reasons. An earthquake or a tidal wave may have demolished the settlement, or fire destroyed it, or the new city marks a new political beginning. The other can be likened to the effect of a magnet. Established settlements attract people, who tend to come whether or not there is any planning for their arrival. The clash between these two sentiments is evident in every established city unless its development has been almost completely accidental or is lost in history. Incidentally, many settlements have been planned from the beginning but, for a variety of reasons, no settlement followed the plan. A good example is Cyrowen, on the Clyde River in New South Wales, which was surveyed in the second half of the 19th century, in expectation that people would come to establish agriculture and a small port. But no one came. Most country towns in New South Wales started with an original survey, whose grid lines are still there today in the pattern of the original streets. Omniscience may be a foible of men, but it is not so a book's. Knowledge, as Johnson said, is of two kinds. You may know a thing yourself, and you may know where to find it. Now the amount which you may actually know yourself must, at its best, be limited. But what you may know of the sources of information may, with proper training, become almost boundless. And here come the value and use of reference books. The working of one book in connection with another, and applying your own intelligence to both. By this means we get as near to that omniscient volume which tells everything as ever we shall get, and although the single volume or work which tells everything does not exist, there is a vast number of reference books in existence, a knowledge and proper use of which is essential to every intelligent person. Necessary as I believe reference books to be, they can easily be made to be contributory to idleness, and too mechanical a use should not be made of them. Very admirable reference books come to us from America, where great industry is shown, and funds for publishing them never seem to be short. The French, too, are excellent at reference books, but the inferior way in which they are printed makes them tiresome to refer to. At the beginning of the 21st century, the relationship between standard and non-standard language is, evidently, still an uncertain one. We are at a transitional point between two eras. We seem to be leaving an era when the rules of Standard English, as selected and defined by prescriptive grammarians, totally conditioned our sense of acceptable usage, so that all other usages and varieties were considered to be inferior or corrupt, and excluded from serious consideration. And we seem to be approaching an era when non-standard usages and varieties, previously denigrated or ignored, are achieving a new presence and respectability within society, reminiscent of that found in Middle English, when dialed variation in literature was widespread and uncontentious. But we are not there yet. The rise of Standard English has resulted in a confrontation between the standard and non-standard dimensions of the language which has lasted for over 200 years, and this has had traumatic consequences which will take some years to eliminate. Once people have been given an inferiority complex about the way they speak or write, they find it difficult to shake off. Well, here's the truth of the matter. Coffee, like anything else, can cause problems if too much is consumed. In the short term, too much coffee will cause insomnia, nausea and hypertension. In the long term, too much coffee will cause stomach problems, teeth staining, and high cholesterol. As for the benefits, moderate consumption of coffee, which means 1 to 4 cups a day, supplies your body with a wealth of antioxidants. These substances are responsible for eliminating free radicals. They are the chemical byproducts produced any time your body does something. A small number of them can help serve as a buffer against negative elements, but if they aren't kept in check, they can cause health problems. Antioxidants ensure that this doesn't happen. The psychological effects of caffeine cannot be ignored either. Not only does caffeine make you more alert, but it can actually affect your mood. If you were feeling depressed or overwhelmed, a nice cup of coffee could change your perspective. The stack of work that seemed impossible before isn't even a problem now. For too long we have held preconceived notions of the market and the state that were seemingly independent of local societies and cultures. Underscore the debate about civil society ultimately is about how culture, market and state relate to each other. Concern about civil society, however, is not only relevant to Central and Eastern Europe and the developing world. It is very much of interest to the European Union as well. The civil dialogue initiated by the Commission in the 1990s was a first attempt by the EU to give the institutions of society and not only governments and businesses a voice at the policy-making tables in Brussels. The EU, like other international institutions, has a long way to go in trying to accommodate the frequently divergent interests of non-governmental organizations and citizen groups. There is increasing recognition that international and national governments have to open up to civil society institutions.
Impressionism was an art movement of the 19th century, which began as a private association of Paris-based artists who exhibited publicly in 1874. It is characterized by a concern with depicting the visual impression of the moment, especially in terms of the shifting effect of light and color. The term Impressionism originated from art critic Louis Leroy, who commented Monet's painting, Impression, Soleil Levant. Leroy said that it indeed was just an impression and that the work could not be considered finished. The Impressionists adopted this term and decided to use it for their own benefit. Early Impressionist painters were radicals in their time, breaking many of the rules of picture making that had been set by earlier generations. From the earliest civilizations, plants and animals have been portrayed as a means of understanding and recording their potential uses, such as their economic and healing properties. From the first illustrated catalogue of medicinal plants, De Materia Medica by Dioscorides, in the 1st century, through to the late 14th century, the illustration of plants and animals changed very little. Woodcuts in instructional manuals and herbals were often repeatedly copied over the centuries, resulting in a loss of definition and accuracy so that they became little more than stylized decoration. With the growing popularity of copperplate engravings, the traditional use of woodcuts declined and the representation of plants and animals became more accurate. Snails are not traditionally known for quick thinking, but new research shows they can make complex decisions using just 2 brain cells in findings that could help engineers design more efficient robots. Scientists at the University of Sussex attached electrodes to the heads of freshwater snails as they searched for lettuce. They found that just 1 cell was used by the mollusk to tell if it was hungry or not, while another let it know when food was present. Food searching is an example of goal-directed behavior, during which an animal must integrate information about both its external environment and internal state while using as little energy as possible. Lead researcher Professor George Kamines said, "This will eventually help us design the brains of robots based on the principle of using the fewest possible components necessary to perform complex tasks." Learning is a process by which behavior or knowledge changes as a result of experience. Learning from experience plays a major role in enabling us to do many things that we clearly were not born to do, from the simplest tasks, such as flipping a light switch, to the more complex, such as playing a musical instrument. To many people, the term learning signifies the activities that students do reading, listening, and taking tests in order to acquire new information. This process, which is known as cognitive learning, is just one type of learning, however. Another way that we learn is by associative learning, which is the focus of this module. You probably associate certain holidays with specific sights, sounds, and smells, or foods with specific flavors and textures. Sociology is, in very basic terms, the study of human societies. In this respect, it is usually classed as one of the social sciences, along with subjects like psychology, and was established as a subject in the late 18th century, through the work of people like the French writer Auguste Comte. However, the subject has only really gained acceptance as an academic subject in the 20th century through the work of writers such as Emile Durkheim, Max Weber and Talcott Parsons, names that will be visited throughout this course. One name that you may have heard of, Karl Marx, the founder of modern communism, has probably done more to stimulate people's interest in the subject than anyone else, even though he lived and wrote, 1818 to 1884, in a period before sociology became fully established as an academic discipline. Sociology, therefore, has a reasonably long history of development. Affordable early years education and childcare potentially enables parents, particularly mothers, to be in paid employment. International studies have found that countries with greater enrollment rates in publicly funded or provided childcare also have higher maternal employment rates, although entangling causal relationships is complex. From the point of view of the household, additional income, especially for the less well-off, is itself associated with better outcomes for children, as child poverty has been shown to be a key independent determinant of children's outcomes. From the point of view of the public purse, as mothers enter employment, they are likely to claim fewer benefits and to generate extra revenues through income tax. Daniel Harris, a scholar of consumption and style, has observed that until photography finally supplanted illustration as the primary means of advertising clothing, in the 1950s, glamour inhered less in the face of the drawing, which was by necessity schematic and generalized, than in the sketch's attitude, posture, and gestures, especially in the strangely dainty positions of the hands. Glamour once resided so emphatically in the stance of the model that the faces in the illustrations cannot really be said to have expressions at all, but angles or tilts. The chin raised upwards in a haughty look, the eyes lowered in an attitude of introspection, the head cocked at an inquisitive or coquettish angle, or the profile presented in sharp outline, emanating power, the severity like an emperor's bust embossed on a Roman coin. In reality, however, the causes of truancy and non-attendance are diverse and multifaceted. There are as many causes of non-attendance as there are non-attenders. Each child has her own unique story, and whilst there may often be certain identifiable factors in common, each non-attending child demands and deserves an individual response, tailored to meet her individual needs. This applies equally to the 14-year-old who fails to attend school because a parent is terminally ill, the overweight 11-year-old who fails to attend because he is embarrassed about changing for PE in front of peers, the 15-year-old who is bored by lessons, and to the 7-year-old who is teased in the playground because she does not wear the latest designer label clothes. Learning to write well means discovering how to write plainly and clearly. Now that doesn't mean that plainness is the only good style, or that you should become a slave to spare, unadorned writing. Formality and ornateness have their place, and in competent hands complexity can carry us on a dizzying, breathtaking journey. But most students, most of the time, should strive to be sensibly simple, to develop a baseline style of short words, active verbs, and relatively simple sentences conveying clear actions or identities. It's faster, it makes arguments easier to follow, it increases the chances a busy reader will bother to pay attention, and it lets you center one more attention on your moments of rhetorical flourish, which I do not advise abandoning altogether.
Newspapers have one basic purpose: to get the news as quickly as possible from its source, from those who make it to those who want to know it. Radio, telegraph, television, and other inventions brought competition for newspapers. So did the development of magazines and other means of communication. However, this competition merely spurred the newspapers on. They quickly made use of the newer and faster means of communication to improve the speed, and thus the efficiency of their own operations. Today more newspapers are printed and read than ever before. Competition also led newspapers to branch out to many other fields. Besides keeping readers informed of the latest news, today's newspapers educate and influence readers about politics and
Newspapers influence readers' economic choices through advertising. Most newspapers depend on advertising for their very existence. Newspapers are sold at a price that fails to cover even a small fraction of the cost of production. The main source of income for most newspapers is commercial advertising. The success in selling advertising depends on a newspaper's value to advertisers. This is measured in terms of circulation. How many people read the newspaper? Circulation depends much on the work of the circulation department and on the services or entertainment offered in a newspaper's pages. But for the most part, circulation depends on a newspaper's value to readers as a source of information about the community, city, country, state, nation, and world, and even outer space. Movement in painting that originated in France in the 1860s and had enormous influence in European and North American painting in the late 19th century. The Impressionists wanted to depict real life, to paint straight from nature, and to capture the changing effects of light. The term was first used abusively to describe Claude Monet's painting Impression, Sunrise, 1872. The other leading Impressionists included Paul Cézanne, Edgar Degas, Edouard Manet, Camille Pissarro, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, and Alfred Sisley, but only Monet remained devoted to Impressionist ideas throughout his career.